The classroom wasn't dangerous, at least. It wasn't supposed to be. It was a clean, polished training hall lined with holographic projectors and reinforced desks, humming softly with the academy's usual sterile calm. But the moment the new transfer student stepped through the door, the room felt wrong. The air tightened. Every conversation cut off mid-sentence. A dozen different species stiffened the way prey animals do when they sense a hunter nearby. Even the instructor's crest flattened against his skull. The alien stood motionless in the doorway, pupils narrowing into predatory slits as he scanned the class. His species evolved on a hyper-predatory world, a place where anything that didn't dominate died before reaching adulthood. You could see it in the way he held himself, head high, shoulders angled forward, hands loose but ready. He wasn't assessing classmates, he was evaluating threats. The rumors said he'd been expelled for treating a previous classroom like an arena. Looking at him now, no one doubted it. He was tall, just under 7 feet, and lean with corded musculature, adapted to quick bursts of violence. His hide had a faint blue-gray hue, and the darker stripes along his neck and forearms pulsed slightly with temperature change. The most unsettling feature wasn't his claws or his teeth. It was the way his eyes moved. No hesitation, no confusion, just steady calculation. Every student he glanced at visibly recoiled. Most looked away. Except the human. Second row from the back, 4th seat in. Dark hair, lean build, expression unreadable. He didn't lean forward, didn't stiffen, just blinked once and kept watching. The alien lingered in the doorway for a full 20 seconds before moving 3 silent steps to the rear of the room, where he remained standing. He didn't sit. He didn't greet. He stood like a sentry waiting for weakness. A Threxian cadet 2 seats away from him whispered something in his native language and quickly shifted to the far side of his desk. A Solarian blinked 3 times in rapid succession, her pupils dilating from stress. The pheromones in the room had already started to shift. A senior cadet from the logistics wing muttered to his neighbor, "If he challenges you, don't look him in the eyes." The instructor cleared his throat and gestured toward the holo display. "Let's begin. This morning's lecture will focus on interspecies cohesion in crisis environments." He stopped. The new cadet hadn't moved, but the atmosphere had. Every breath the predator took seemed to thin the room's oxygen. The screens dimmed imperceptibly. One of the desks near the front retracted its leg extensions in what was likely a stress response. The instructor forced himself to continue the presentation, his voice steady but less confident now. The predator cadet didn't take notes, didn't even look at the display. His attention never left the students. He was reading them fear scent markers, blink intervals, posture, and pulse rhythms. The students squirmed under his attention. A Varelian had to activate a med strip on his forearm after his respiratory rate spiked. His species was pheromone sensitive. Any more exposure, and he'd risk syncope. And still, the human did nothing. No change in heart rate, no posture shift, no glance away, just calm awareness. At exactly 9 minutes into the session, the new cadet spoke for the first time. "My last school feared me," he said, his voice low but cutting. "They were right to." No one responded. "I don't come from a place where we ask. We take. We dominate. We earn place through strength and keep it through pain. That is our law. I challenged my last class because they lacked order. I gave it to them." The instructor moved slightly forward, but not quickly. "I put 3 in the infirmary," the alien continued. "They weren't worthy to learn beside me, and if you aren't either." He looked around. "You won't last long here." The silence was thick. No one even breathed. Then came the alarm. Just a short, sharp alert from the hallway, a false sensor ping from one of the corridor pressure seals. The instructor turned instinctively to silence the panel. And in that fraction of a second, everything changed. The predator moved. A flick of his wrist, a faint shimmer, and a curved blade snapped from his palm with a metallic rasp. His spines flared along his arms and neck. The scent that filled the air was immediate and overwhelming dominance pheromones, concentrated and volatile. The Varelian next to him collapsed instantly. 2 Threxians stumbled back into their desks. A Silarian let out a sharp, involuntary whimper and dropped to the floor, trembling. The alien stepped into the center aisle, blade raised. "Only the strongest deserve this academy." Chaos erupted. Desks clattered, chairs toppled, students scrambled to the walls or ducked under tables. One cadet vomited from pheromone exposure. Another, agorally from the outer systems, stumbled into the wall clutching his chest. His heart rate spiked. The med drone in the ceiling triggered and dispatched a triage signal to the hallway. The instructor stepped forward, but then recoiled. The pheromones hit him like a toxin, flooding his system with panic chemistry. And still, the human hadn't moved. Then his chair slid back. Not with urgency, not with panic. Just a single, measured motion. He stood. He didn't square his shoulders. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood. Every sound in the room died. The alien turned. He had sensed movement, but what he saw was wrong. The human wasn't afraid. No shaking limbs, no wide eyes, no retreat. The blade wavered slightly in the predator's grip. Because for the first time in his life, he felt the chemical signal of something alien to his instincts. It wasn't fear. It was nothing. No fear scent, no panic behavior, no submissive posture. The human's gaze met his not in challenge, not in defiance. In calm. And worse, in familiarity. The predator had seen that expression before. Back home, in the jungles of his birth world, from something that watched his species from the dark, something that didn't run, something that waited. He stepped back without realizing it. The pheromones stopped working. The room watched, paralyzed for an entirely different reason now. The instructor managed a breath. The predator hadn't moved again. But neither had the human. They stood in a silent line, one armed, the other not. One bred for dominance, the other forged by survival. The alien's pupils twitched. The human took a single step forward. One step. And it was perfect. Balanced, controlled, silent. His center of gravity didn't shift. His breathing didn't change. His gaze didn't harden. But every movement was precise, like muscle memory trained, not in combat halls, but in places where hesitation meant death. The predator smelled something else now. Something wrong. Something worse than threat. He smelled mercy. And understood, in one piercing moment of clarity, that it was the only thing keeping him alive. He lowered the blade. It folded back into his arm with a soft click. He turned. And sat. The human sat a heartbeat later. No one else moved. The instructor swallowed once, reached for his datapad, and said quietly, "Class, dismissed." No one protested. No one asked what happened. And no one, absolutely no one, looked at the human the same way again. The training hall emptied slowly. No one rushed. No one spoke. The usual clatter of chairs and conversations was absent, replaced by the careful hush of creatures who had seen something they didn't yet understand. One cadet lingered by the exit panel, eyes flicking from the human to the blade-wielding predator, trying to make sense of what hadn't happened. The predator cadet didn't move. He sat where he had dropped into his chair, eyes forward, fists clenched tight in a way that suggested he wasn't restraining himself, he was trying to remember how. The human, too, hadn't left. He sat quietly, not watching, not waiting, just there. After a full 2 minutes, the instructor approached them both. "Cadets," he said carefully, "I need a moment. Alone." The predator's spines shifted once in agitation, but he rose. His claws remained sheathed. He did not look at the human again as he left. The instructor sat in the now empty chair across from the human and let out a breath. That was a situation. The human gave a quiet nod. The instructor waited. "You didn't even raise your voice," he said eventually. "Why?" Noah Martin, Earth designation, Terran human male, leaned back slightly, as if the question didn't need pondering. "He wasn't hunting," he said. "He was testing." "Testing?" the instructor echoed. "Boundary testing, like a dog in a new yard. He wanted to know if anyone could stop him. When no one moved, he thought he'd already won, but when I stood, he saw what he missed." The instructor tilted his head. "And what was that?" The human met his gaze, expression neutral. "That humans don't bluff." A flicker passed through the instructor's face, understanding, but also concern. "He had a blade," he said. "Yeah," the human replied. "He used pheromones. He almost dropped 2 cadets into cardiac shock. I know. You had nothing. Noah shook his head once. I had plenty. The instructor waited again. I had 10,000 years of violent conflict, on a planet that weaponized everything from weather to bacteria. I had hand-me-down instincts from people who survived wolves, wars, and winters without names. I had the advantage of watching him move first. And I had one more thing. What? I didn't want to fight him. The instructor blinked. That's your advantage? I stood because I knew he'd make me if I didn't, so I gave him the chance to stop before I had to show him what happens when humans fight for real. There was no bravado in the words. No challenge. Only truth. Elsewhere, in the medical bay, the Varelian cadet lay propped up under an oxygen hood while the med drone quietly recalibrated his neural stress markers. Pheromone recovery protocols were standard: elevated heart rate, tremors, risk of fainting. He wasn't in danger now, but the med tech still monitored him closely. Across the room, Agorali wrapped his forearm in a muscle-relaxant band. His species didn't respond to pheromones with paralysis, but with a full-on sympathetic surge, short of breath, nausea. High risk of overstrain injury. 2 more cadets had been checked and released with mild coordination issues. 4 hadn't even made it to the wall. Only 1 cadet in the entire room hadn't suffered even a trace of sympathetic shock. Human, Noah Martin. Vitals. Resting heart rate, 62 beats per minute. Cortisol spike, negligible. Adrenaline, within acceptable range for mild alert status. Muscle tension, balanced. Reaction time, unimpaired. Neural variance, flat. The medic running the data frowned at the tablet. That's not possible. The assistant tech looked up. Faulty reading? The senior medic shook his head. No, just a human response. In his assigned bunk, the Predator cadet stared at the metal panel across from his bed. It wasn't silence that bothered him. It was stillness. He had been raised in motion, in movement and challenge, in heat and dust and violence. He had been told he would be tested at the academy, but he expected dominance rituals, challenges, fights. Blood, if necessary. That was the way of his people. But he had not been prepared for stillness. Stillness was not passivity. That was his mistake. Stillness could be control, calculation, restraint. Stillness could mean waiting for the right moment. And that's what the human had done. He'd waited until the Predator had reached peak dominance, blade up, scent active, challenge issued. And then stood. Not to meet force with force. Not to challenge. To end the moment. The Predator's claws flexed reflexively. Not out of threat, but out of discomfort. He could still see it one step. One perfect step. Balanced. Not a millimeter wasted. Predators watched movement to read intent. And in that single step, he had seen no opening, no tell, no room for a response. He wasn't afraid of humans. He had seen holovids, read reports, sparred with 2 once. But this one didn't match anything from the files. There was no arrogance, no swagger, no boasting. There had only been calm. Predators relied on dominance, on prey instincts. The human had neither. He had stood because he had already decided. The Predator muttered under his breath in his native tongue, something ancient and rarely said aloud. The words didn't translate easily. It meant, the fight I started ended when I blinked. And it stayed with him. Later that week, the Predator cadet returned to the classroom. The seats were already half filled. The instructor entered behind him, and he stopped just inside the doorway. He didn't make an announcement. Didn't look for prey. He looked at one thing, only the human's seat. Noah Martin was seated, reading something on his display. The Predator walked toward the open seat 2 rows in front of him, and sat, not in submission, in recognition. Because when strength is real, it doesn't have to be loud. When dominance is performative, it fails against calm certainty. And when predators evolve to intimidate everything smaller, they aren't prepared for something that grew up fighting things bigger. The academy usually felt alive in the mornings. Cadets of every species hurried along the wide metallic corridors, exchanging quick greetings or trading data pads filled with half-finished assignments. Today, the energy was different, quiet, controlled, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see whether yesterday's incident would repeat itself. Noah Martin walked into the hallway with the same calm gait he always had. Not too fast, not too slow, balanced, efficient. A posture learned through a lifetime of moving through dangerous places without drawing attention. Most cadets stepped aside politely as he passed, but not out of fear. They just didn't want to interrupt whatever it was that made him so composed. Across the atrium, the Predator cadet stood alone. He wasn't posturing now. His shoulders weren't pitched forward. His spines lay flat against his skin. He looked not smaller, precisely, but less inflated, less certain of his place. His species communicated dominance through stance, muscle tension, and gaze. Today, he avoided using all three. He didn't look at anyone until Noah crossed his line of sight. Their eyes met for half a second. Noah gave a small nod. Not a challenge. An acknowledgement. The Predator responded with the slightest tilt of his chin, a gesture from his culture that meant he was not seeking a challenge. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Noah noticed. He always noticed. The instructor nearby noticed too. He let out a soft exhale. Good, they can coexist. But coexistence wasn't the lesson the Academy learned that day. It was what happened next. Class began with a review of crisis management protocols. The students were still shaken, attention sharp and jittery. The Varelian had been cleared by medical, but now wore a small pheromone-neutralizing patch behind his ear. The Gorali's pulse monitor was visible beneath his uniform sleeve. A few still looked at the Predator as though expecting him to snap at any moment. Yet he sat quietly in the front row. Halfway through the lecture, the instructor paused at a slide, showing physiological threat responses across species. Elevated heart rates, defensive posture, adrenaline spikes, pupil dilation. He couldn't help glancing toward Noah. Human adrenaline response, he said, tapping the display, is unusual in that it does not always produce fear reactions. In some cases, humans exhibit what medical researchers call controlled sympathetic override. Their body floods with stress hormones, yet their behavior remains calm. Athrexian raised a hand. That sounds impossible. Stress should cause aggression or retreat. Noah didn't comment. He simply continued taking notes. The instructor adjusted the slide. Humans possess a behavior pattern often misinterpreted as fearlessness. It is not fearlessness. It is compartmentalization. When faced with a threat, their cognitive processing splits between immediate survival and later emotional response. The outward effect is calm. A Solarian blinked at Noah. So he wasn't fearless yesterday. He was, the instructor said, but that isn't the point. He didn't freeze. He didn't panic. His heart rate barely shifted. Humans evolved under pressure from predators that hunted cooperatively. Panic killed. Stillness let them assess. The Predator cadet stiffened. Stillness, he repeated quietly. Yes, the instructor said. The absence of fear signals in a prey creature confuses predator instincts. Most species rely on those cues to assess danger. When they are missing, misalignment occurs. The Predator raised his hand. For my species, he said, attack dominance depends on reading prey. Weakness makes us bold. Strength makes us cautious. But he turned, looking at Noah properly for the first time since the incident. He had no scent of either. Noah finally looked up at him. I wasn't trying to project anything. That is what unsettled me, the Predator replied. The room went still again, but this time for a different reason. The Predator wasn't confessing weakness. He was describing revelation. When I saw you stand, he said softly, my body recognized something my mind did not. Not prey, not threat, something else. What? Athrexian asked, his voice a mix of awe and confusion. A rival alpha, the Predator said. Noah shook his head immediately. I am not your alpha. No, but you could be. A ripple passed through the room. Noah closed his notebook and sat back. I didn't stand to dominate you. I stood because you were about to hurt people. I don't like seeing people hurt. The simplicity of the statement seemed to hit harder than any threat could have. Predatory species understood dominance. They did not understand restraint. Class ended without incident. Students filed out more naturally than the day before. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had become something manageable, something less sharp. The predator lingered, watching the others leave. He glanced toward Noah, who was packing his bag without hurry. "Human," he said. "Noah," the human corrected. The predator hesitated. "Noah." "What's up?" "I owe you something." "You don't owe me anything." The predator shook his head. "My species resolves debt." "You don't owe me," Noah repeated. "You didn't attack me." "I would have," the predator said. "My drive was rising. Your calm interrupted it." Noah zipped his bag closed and stood. "You stopped yourself." "I stopped because I felt—" The predator struggled for the word. "Wrong." "Good," Noah said simply. "That means you're capable of more than you were taught." The predator blinked. "You think I can change?" "I think you already did." The predator looked down at his palm, flexing the claw that had held the weapon. "You should have killed me," he said. Noah sighed. "Why would I do that?" "Because I drew a blade." "You put it away." "That does not erase the challenge." "It does for me." The predator stared at him, spine shifting slightly in confusion. "You terrify me," he said. "That's fine," Noah answered, adjusting his pack on his shoulder. "Some of the things I grew up around terrified me too." "What made you like this?" the predator asked. Noah paused at the doorway. "Nothing made me like this," he said, "but a lot of things taught me not to be afraid of you." He left without another word. The predator watched him go, the lesson settling deeper than any classroom lecture ever had. Predators ruled through fear. Humans survived without it. Or, rather, they survived with it, but refused to let it change the way they stood. The combat analysis lab was always colder than the rest of the academy, a deliberate design choice to simulate the conditions of deep space boarding engagements. Metal panels lined the walls, and the scent of ozone clung to the floor from decades of discharged training pulses. Inside, cadets gathered in silent tension, not because of an upcoming test, but because of what had almost happened 3 days ago. The instructors called it a non-incident. The cadets knew better. There was no official record of an attack, no file entry about the predator cadet drawing a weapon. But every species present during the event remembered the air thick with dominance pheromones, the way desks scraped in panic, and the silence that followed when one human stood up and everything stopped. They were here now to study it, not the moment, but the response. The lesson for the day was engagement avoidance through psychological projection. On the holoscreen, scenarios played from past galactic conflicts. A Varkari commander diffusing a mutiny with posture and tone modulation. A Yura diplomat halting a riot by adjusting blink frequency to match a predator's relaxation rhythm. And then, silently, a reconstructed model appeared. A humanoid silhouette rising slowly from a desk. Arms loose, spine aligned, jaw relaxed. No visible signs of aggression. Yet the predictive algorithms flashed one word above the image. Unengageable. The room fell still. Noah stood in the back, watching the simulation with unreadable eyes. His hands were in his pockets. He hadn't volunteered to be here. He had been summoned, but not ordered. Just asked. Invited. He knew why. Across the room, the predator cadet Talaric watched the same model with narrowed eyes. "That was you," someone muttered near the front. "It's based on the incident," the instructor said carefully. Or rather, the non-incident. The class shifted in their seats. "You're saying he projected threat?" a Solarian asked, gesturing at the screen. The instructor shook his head. "No. Projection implies intention. This was recognition." The predator did not perceive a threat signal. He perceived the absence of one, and for his species, that is worse. Talaric's spines flicked upward once. "It's true," he said aloud. "When prey does not display fear, it suggests either madness or unmatched strength. And madness doesn't stand calmly. Madness trembles. It weeps. It breaks before it burns." But Noah didn't break. The Varelian medic from earlier raised his hand cautiously. But his physiology, he didn't even spike? Nothing? The instructor flicked to a second image. Medical readouts. Heart rate steady, blood pressure controlled, no tremors, no neural anomalies. "Human sympathetic override in action," the instructor said. "A survival trait adapted for environments where every shadow might hold death, and panicking meant you didn't live long enough to pass your genes along. That's not training, muttered a Threxian in awe. That's evolutionary trauma. More like evolutionary adaptation, Noah corrected from the back of the room, his tone casual but clear. We didn't get to the top of our food chain because we were the fastest or the strongest. We got there because we watched, waited, learned when to run, learned when to build, and learned when not to start something we didn't need to finish. The instructor nodded slowly. So, when Talaric drew his weapon, I didn't think. I just knew I had to make him stop before someone else got hurt. No one challenged the logic, not even Talaric. Because in truth, they all remembered that moment too vividly to question it. Later that cycle, Talaric approached Noah outside the simulation range. The hallway was quiet, echoing with the low thrum of the station's gravity plates. He didn't bother with formality this time. I dreamed of the step again, he said without preamble. Noah turned his head, brow furrowed slightly. The one you took. In the classroom. I see it over and over. Just one step. But it holds. Too much. Noah said nothing. He waited. Talaric folded his arms across his chest. We learn to read intent by stance. A lean forward means aggression. A weight shift means preparation. A twitch means adrenaline. But your step, it had none of that. It wasn't meant to, Noah said. Then what was it? Noah exhaled, slowly. It was the decision to be ready. Talaric stared. Not to fight? To be ready to. Big difference. There was a long pause. My people don't understand that, Talaric said. We fight to decide everything. Mating, hierarchy, education slots. But you? Noah shook his head. We fight to protect. Then why do you win so often? Talaric asked, genuinely baffled. Your species, your planet, wins wars it should lose. You lack the natural defenses. You bleed. You break. Your internal organs are soft. You die easily. Noah met his gaze. We don't win by being invincible. We win by not giving up. The words landed harder than he expected. Talaric stood very still. Eventually, he said, the lesson wasn't yours to teach, but I learned it. Noah half smiled. You're still here. That means you learned it before it was too late. Talaric nodded once, slow and deliberate. My people will not understand this. When I return, they'll expect blood. A victory tale. Noah shrugged. Then tell them the truth. You fought someone without lifting a claw and lost. Talaric's spines flared, then slowly folded flat again. He bowed his head once. A gesture of respect. Not submission. Not defeat. Just the acknowledgement of something larger than strength. That evening, as the stars turned over the edge of the observation deck, Noah sat with his datapad resting in his lap. He wasn't reading, just thinking. Behind him, the instructor stepped into the quiet. You never struck him, he said softly. Didn't need to. He was armed. Not stupid. The instructor chuckled quietly. Noah looked up. Do you think that's it? He asked. He won't try again? The instructor hesitated. He'll try something again. He was raised to. But not that. Not with you. That moment passed. You burned a lesson into him the way no simulation could. Noah nodded once. Good. The instructor stepped to the glass, watching a shuttle lift toward the upper orbit lanes. Most cadets come here to learn skills, he said. Tactics, equations, theory. But there are some things you can't teach with charts and drills. Noah tilted his head. Like what? The instructor looked at him. Like how to stop a war before it starts. Noah looked down again. I hope I never have to try that more than once. The instructor smiled faintly. I hope you're wrong, because if every classroom had one cadet like you... He trailed off. Noah didn't answer. He didn't need to. Some lessons didn't require tests. Some victories didn't need to be won out loud. The Academy's ceremony hall was never silent. Even when empty, it echoed with the remnants of applause, of lectures concluded, of cadets called up for recognition or dismissed for failure. But today, it was quiet in the way only respect can create, every chair filled, every voice stilled, every breath taken deliberately. The overhead lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, and the central podium pulsed gently with the Academy crest. It wasn't a graduation, nor a disciplinary assembly. It was something in between. The student body had gathered not for celebration or punishment, but to acknowledge something that didn't fit into either category. Something that had happened without official report, without combat drills, without medals or injuries. Yet it was an event that had changed everything. Because one of their own had stopped a threat without throwing a punch. And for a species like humanity, that was worth explaining. Noah Martin stood at the rear wall, arms crossed, gaze scanning the hall with cautious discomfort. He didn't want to be the focus of this. He hadn't asked for attention. The instructor who'd first spoken to him after the incident, Command Specialist Jarrell, stepped up to the podium and cleared his throat. "Cadets," he said, voice firm. "This is not a required event. No grades, no citations, no evaluations." And yet the room was packed. "This is a lesson." He tapped the display. A hologram flickered to life behind him, not of weapons or simulations, but of body posture, from a recording taken during the day of the incident. A silhouette Noah's rising from a seated position, calm, balanced, unhurried. "You've all seen this," Jarrell said. "Some of you were here. Others watched the footage in private, with growing curiosity or disbelief." He turned toward the human at the back of the room. "Today, you'll hear the rest." A few cadets shifted uneasily. One raised a hand. It was a young Ralothian, tall and thin, whose species rarely interrupted unless it was urgent. "Why him?" he asked. "Why does that moment matter more than everything we've drilled?" Jarrell smiled. "Because he didn't fight," he said. "He stopped a fight with a choice. He redefined the outcome before it began, not by removing the threat, but by refusing to respond with equal aggression. And more importantly, he did it without needing to be asked." Talaric stood slowly from his seat near the front. There was no ceremony in his motion, just clarity. "I asked him once why he stood," he said. "I expected a tactical answer, something like, 'I calculated threat response vectors,' or 'I acted to neutralize escalation.'" He paused. What he said was, "Someone was about to get hurt." Talaric turned to the audience. "On my world, strength is proven through force. But on Earth, strength is often shown through restraint." He stood because he could not watch the innocent suffer. He chose not to dominate, even when he had the position and the skill to do so. "I drew a weapon." He answered with stillness. The silence that followed was not awkward, it was reverent. Talaric sat back down. He didn't look at Noah again. He didn't need to. Because acknowledgement didn't always come with eye contact. Sometimes it was in the seat someone didn't take the throne they could have claimed, but left empty because they had nothing to prove. Jarrell stepped aside and gestured toward the human. Noah didn't move at first. Then, with a sigh like someone accepting an inevitability, he walked slowly down the side aisle and took the podium. He looked uncomfortable. He didn't check his notes. He didn't smile. He just started speaking. "I don't have a speech," he said. "I didn't prepare one because I didn't expect this to be a thing." A few cadets chuckled. "I didn't stop Talaric because I wanted to prove something. I wasn't testing myself. I wasn't making a statement. I stood because I've seen what happens when no one stands. Back home, we lose people when that happens. Whole villages, sometimes. Cities. Classrooms." He looked down at the floor for a second, then back up. "Some of you think I didn't feel fear. I did. But I know what fear does to people, and I've learned to feel it afterward. That's what kept me upright." He paused. "You don't need to be brave to stand up. You just have to decide that standing is better than sitting still while someone else gets hurt." The room remained silent. Maybe that sounds too simple, but I've learned that complicated problems usually start with someone being afraid to take a simple action. Noah looked toward Jarrell, then back to the cadets. "You all trained for war, for engagement, for survival. But sometimes, survival means doing nothing, until doing nothing puts someone else in danger. That's the line." Another pause. This time, he shrugged slightly. "I didn't cross the line to make a point. I crossed it because someone had to." He stepped back from the podium. No applause followed. There wasn't supposed to be any. Instead, cadets stood, one by one, in silence. Not in salute. In acknowledgement, even Talaric stood. And for a long moment, The room was full of cadets, not competing, not comparing, not posturing, but simply standing. Because that's what the human had done. He had stood. And it had been enough. Weeks later, a new class entered the academy. Among the first briefings they received was a non-compulsory holo recording labeled Unarmed Incident Response, Voluntary Case Study. Inside the file, there were no weapons. No violence. Just one human rising from his chair while others fled. And the final words in the instructor's notes? Humans don't stand because they're ready to fight. They stand because they're unwilling to let others fall.